The morning sky was calm, soft clouds floating like cotton over the shining city of Los Angeles. The airport was busy with the usual noise of rolling suitcases, rushing footsteps, and voices calling for final boarding. Among them was the sound of Flight 327 being announced, a small private jet ready to take off for Denver. The passengers walked toward it without knowing what was waiting for them above the clouds. Captain Mark Lewis stood near the steps of the jet, tall and confident. Wearing his Navy uniform that looked as perfect as his smile, he greeted each passenger with warmth, his voice calm like someone who had done this all his life. His co-pilot Jake followed behind him, younger and full of energy, checking every detail on his clipboard. Both men looked like a perfect team, ready for another smooth flight. Among the passengers there was a quiet woman named Emily Carter, her skin pale, her hair tied loosely, her eyes closed, and her body covered with a thin blanket. She was not sitting upright like the others. She was lying across two seats near the back, still as a statue, so still that it made people whisper to each other. A man asked the flight attendant softly if she was asleep, but the attendant's face went pale and she whispered back that Emily was being transported to a hospital in Denver. The doctors had declared her gone, but her family wanted her body flown home one last time. No one dared to ask more. They just sat in silence, a little disturbed by the idea of flying with someone who was no longer alive. The engine started to hum. The wings trembled as the plane moved across the runway, and the passengers fastened their seatbelts while the captain's voice came through the speaker, saying they would reach Denver in just under 2 hours. Everyone relaxed, believing it would be an easy trip. As the plane climbed higher, the sunlight hit the windows and clouds surrounded them like silver smoke. A few passengers chatted softly. Some listened to music and others tried to sleep. The co-pilot handed Captain Mark a cup of coffee. They laughed about sports and weather and the next vacation. Everything felt normal, safe, peaceful. But fate had already chosen a different plan. 30 minutes into the flight, a soft shake ran through the plane, then another, a stronger one. The seatbelt sign came on with a chime. Captain Mark frowned and checked the radar. It showed some light turbulence ahead. Nothing serious. He spoke through the speaker again, telling everyone to stay seated, his voice still calm. But his hand felt slightly weak as he held the microphone. Jake noticed it and asked if he was fine. Mark smiled faintly and said he just needed water. The turbulence passed, and silence filled the air again, except for the steady hum of the engines, but something didn't feel right. Mark leaned back in his seat, breathing heavier than before, his chest tightening, his face losing color. Jake turned to look at him and froze. Captain Mark's hand slipped from the controls. His eyes rolled upward, his head fell sideways, and the microphone dropped to the floor with a soft clink. The plane began to tilt slightly to the left. Alarms started to beep. Jake shouted his name, shaking his shoulder. But Mark did not move. His body was limp. Jake grabbed the controls quickly and tried to stabilize the jet. His heart racing, he pressed the radio button and called out, "Mayday, mayday, captain is unconscious, requesting immediate assistance." But static filled his headset. The signal was weak inside the cabin. Passengers began to sense something was wrong. The plane had started to dip slightly. Cups rolled off the trays. A baby began to cry. The flight attendant, Sarah, ran toward the cockpit, her face pale as she saw the captain slumped in his seat. She screamed for help. One passenger who said he was a doctor rushed forward, his hands trembling as he checked the captain's pulse. The doctor's face turned grim. He whispered to Jake that the captain wasn't breathing. Sarah covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. Jake shouted over the noise. Trying to keep control of the aircraft, the alarms echoed louder, red lights flashing across the panel. The passengers were crying, praying, shouting, asking what was happening, fear spreading like fire. The clouds outside grew thicker, swallowing the jet in gray mist. Lightning flashed in the distance. The storm ahead looked darker now. Jake tried to climb higher, his hands shaking on the controls, sweat rolling down his neck. His voice cracked as he spoke again into the radio. "Mayday, this is Flight 327, pilot down, repeating pilot down, need emergency support now." No one answered, only static. His voice echoed in the empty sky back in the cabin. The doctor and Sarah laid the captain on the floor, trying chest compressions, trying everything, but there was no response. The passengers were crying harder, some clutching each other, others whispering prayers. The jet shook again. One of the overhead bins opened and bags fell onto the floor. Chaos filled the air. Amid the noise, Sarah noticed something strange at the back of the plane. The blanket that covered Emily Carter had slipped slightly, and there was movement beneath it. At first she thought it was just the air or vibration, but then she saw a hand twitch, just a small motion, soft but real. Her breath caught in her throat. She took a step closer, staring in disbelief, her voice shaking as she whispered to the doctor. "I think she just moved." He turned to look, confusion on his face. The passengers followed his eyes, gasping. The woman they believed to be dead was breathing. Slowly, softly, her chest rising and falling under the blanket. And for a moment the fear inside the cabin turned into stunned silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Only the sound of the engines filled the air, heavy and haunting, as the plane drifted through the storm with no pilot and a woman they thought was gone now. Slowly waking up, chaos filled the small jet as lightning flashed across the clouds. The plane shook hard and screams echoed through the cabin. The passengers clung to their seats, eyes wide with fear, and Sarah, the flight attendant, tried to keep her balance as she shouted for everyone to stay calm, though her own voice trembled with panic. Inside the cockpit, Jake, the young co-pilot, fought to keep the jet level, his hands tight on the controls, his face pale with sweat. He kept shouting into the radio, "Mayday, mayday, pilot down, repeat, pilot down, need immediate help." But the only sound that came back was static. Every second felt like an hour. The alarms on the dashboard screamed in red lights, and the oxygen mask swung from the ceiling. The doctor named Harris knelt beside Captain Mark on the floor, his hands pressing down hard on the man's chest, trying to start his heart again, his face tense and desperate. Sarah counted the compressions under her breath. 25, 26, 27. But Captain Mark's body remained still, lifeless, unmoving. The air grew heavy with hopelessness. The doctor looked up, shaking his head slowly, and whispered, "He is gone." Sarah gasped, her eyes filling with tears. She covered her mouth, trying not to scream. Jake looked over his shoulder and saw the scene through the open cockpit door, and his heart dropped. The captain was gone. The leader of the flight, the man he trusted, gone at 30,000 feet above the ground. Jake's voice cracked as he spoke to himself, "I can't do this alone." The plane dipped again, a rough shake running through every seat. Passengers shouted in terror. One woman fainted. A child cried for his mother, and bags rolled down the aisle. Harris ran to help Sarah strap the unconscious passenger, their hands shaking as they tried to move quickly through the stormy chaos. Then suddenly, amid the noise, something strange happened. Sarah turned to look toward the back again. The blanket that covered Emily Carter, the woman who was believed to be dead, moved once more. A slow movement, like someone trying to wake up from a deep sleep. Sarah blinked, thinking her eyes were playing tricks. But then she saw it clearly. The blanket rose and fell again. A faint breath escaped from underneath. She froze, whispering to Harris in disbelief, "She's alive." Harris turned sharply, his face confused. He hurried to the back with Sarah following close behind. The passengers stared wide-eyed, unable to look away. The doctor leaned over Emily, placing 2 fingers on her neck, searching for a pulse. A few long seconds passed. Then his eyes widened. "She has a heartbeat," he said softly. "She's breathing." The cabin went silent. Even the crying stopped for a moment as everyone stared at Emily. The woman who had been pronounced dead hours ago was alive. Her fingers twitched again. Her eyelids fluttered, and a small sound came from her throat like a whisper or a gasp. Sarah reached out her hand, touching Emily's arm gently, her voice trembling as she said, "Ma'am, can you hear me? Please open your eyes." Emily's eyes opened halfway, unfocused and confused. She looked around slowly as if waking from a long dream. Her lips parted and she spoke in a weak voice. "Where am I?" Sarah smiled through tears. "You're on a plane to Denver. We thought you were gone." Emily blinked again, her breathing uneven. "What happened?" she asked softly, her voice hoarse. Harris leaned closer. "You've been unconscious for hours. We thought you were dead." Emily looked down at herself, confused. She touched her chest as if checking her own heartbeat. Her eyes grew wet, but before anyone could say more, another violent shake hit the plane. People screamed again. Sarah stumbled and grabbed the seat beside her. Jake's voice came over the speaker. "Everyone brace yourself. Turbulence ahead. Hold tight." The sound of thunder cracked like a gunshot outside. The plane dropped, suddenly losing altitude fast. Trays flew open. Cups scattered across the floor. Sarah shouted for everyone to stay seated, but her words were drowned by the roaring of the engines. Emily's body was thrown sideways against the seat, but she pushed herself up with trembling arms, her eyes wide with something between fear and focus. She turned toward the front of the plane, her voice suddenly sharper. "What's happening?" she asked Sarah, gasped. The pilot had a heart attack, she cried. He's gone. The co-pilot is trying to control the plane, but we're losing altitude. Emily's breathing grew faster, her hands trembling but her eyes suddenly filled with determination. She whispered something under her breath that Sarah could not hear clearly. Then louder she said, "I need to get to the cockpit." Harris frowned, shaking his head. "You need rest. You're not well." Emily looked at him, her expression fierce. "No, I need to get there now." She unbuckled the straps, holding her blanket aside. Her legs wobbled as she stood, but her steps grew stronger with each move toward the front. Sarah followed her, shouting, "You can't go in there, it's not safe," but Emily did not stop. The passengers watched in stunned silence as the woman they thought was dead walked slowly through the narrow aisle, her hair messy, her face pale but her eyes burning with strange strength. Every step felt heavy with mystery. The storm outside flashed white light through the windows as thunder rolled around them like drums in the sky. Jake looked up as the cockpit door opened. He saw her standing there and his eyes widened. "Who are you?" he shouted over the roaring noise. Emily steadied herself on the wall, her voice steady but cold. "I'm someone who used to fly one of these." Jake stared in disbelief as she stepped closer, looking at the controls like they were old friends. Sarah stood behind her, whispering, "How do you know this?" Emily's lips curled into a small, sad smile. "I'll explain later if we survive this." The alarms screamed louder. Lightning struck nearby and the plane shook again. Jake's hand slipped slightly on the controls and Emily reached out, grabbing them with surprising confidence. Her voice calm and clear. "Now hold it steady," she said firmly. "Don't fight the wind, feel it move with you." Jake blinked, frozen for a second, then did as she said. Together they leveled the plane for a moment, and in that fragile pause of calm, everyone on board felt something shift. Hope. The thunder roared like angry drums around the small jet as Emily stood inside the cockpit, her hands gripping the sides of the door. Her face pale, but her eyes sharp with something powerful inside them. The co-pilot Jake stared at her in disbelief, unable to understand how a woman who was believed to be dead a few minutes ago was now standing in front of him, steady and calm, while the world outside seemed ready to tear the plane apart. The alarms screamed again, red lights flashing on every screen. The plane tilted slightly to the right and Jake shouted over the noise, "We're losing altitude, I can't keep her straight. The wind is pulling us down." Emily moved closer, her fingers brushing over the switches, her movements careful, and, sure like someone who had done this before, she said in a low voice, "Reduce thrust on the left engine. A little, trust me." Jake hesitated, staring at her face, unsure if he should listen to her, but something in her tone made him obey. He turned the lever, down, and the plane steadied slightly. The tilt slowed, the alarms dimmed, and for the first time since the captain collapsed, there was a small breath of hope. Sarah, the flight attendant, stood just behind them, gripping the doorframe, her heart pounding. She looked at Emily like she was seeing a ghost, her voice shaking. "How do you know what to do?" Emily did not look back, her eyes fixed on the horizon ahead. "I used to fly," she said softly, her voice almost lost under the thunder. Jake blinked in surprise. "You were a pilot," she nodded. "Once, years ago." "Military," she whispered, "but no one believed me after what happened." Her voice cracked slightly and she looked away. The plane shook again, and the radio crackled faintly. "This is Air Control Flight 327 due. You copy?" Jake grabbed the mic. Yes, we copy. The pilot is down. We need emergency assistance." Emily leaned forward and spoke into the radio, her voice steady. "This is Emily Carter. I'm taking control of the aircraft. Repeat, I'm taking control." There was silence on the radio. Then a voice filled with confusion. "Did you say Emily Carter?" Jake frowned, looking at her. "What's going on? Who are you, really?" Emily ignored the question, her hands moving quickly over the controls, checking dials, adjusting. "Altitude." She spoke to Jake quietly. "We need to keep her level. We're too close to the storm line. We have to climb above it." Meanwhile, back in the cabin, passengers were whispering to each other, trying to understand what was happening. Some prayed, some cried, and others held their seats tightly as the jet rattled through the dark clouds. A small child asked his mother, "Is the dead lady flying the plane now?" The mother did not answer. She just hugged him closer, tears in her eyes. Sarah returned. To the cabin, her voice trembling but loud enough for everyone to hear. Please everyone, stay calm. We are being guided by someone who knows how to fly this plane. Trust her, she said. But her words did little to calm the storm of fear around them. People still looked terrified. The idea that a woman once believed dead was now flying the plane felt like something from a nightmare or a miracle. Back in the cockpit, lightning flashed across the glass, lighting up Emily's face for a second. Jake could see scars along her neck, small but deep marks like reminders of something terrible he wanted to ask, but he couldn't. The plane jolted again, and Emily shouted, "Hold it tight. The turbulence will hit harder for the next minute." Jake did as she said, gripping the yoke, his arms shaking from the strain. She took a deep breath, her voice softer as she said, "I crashed a jet once during a storm like this. They said I died. I almost did. I spent months in a coma. When I woke up, they told me my body shuts down. Sometimes it looks like death, but it isn't." She paused, her eyes full of shadows. "That's why they thought I was gone earlier." Jake's mouth fell open. He looked at her with shock. "You're the Emily Carter, the one from the training accident." She nodded slowly. "The same one." The radio crackled again. Air control speaking. "We have your location, Emily. We're tracking you now. Do you have visual of land?" Emily looked out the window, nothing but storm and darkness. She replied, "Negative. We're still inside the storm, visibility 0. The plane shook violently again, the oxygen masks swayed, the engines groaned and the lights flickered, passengers screamed. Emily's hands flew across the controls. She shouted to Jake, "Decrease speed or the wings will tear." He moved quickly, following her lead. She guided the plane through a narrow pocket of calm air between thunderclouds, her instincts sharp, every move smooth and confident. For a moment there was peace. The sound of the storm softened. The jet leveled out. Emily exhaled slowly. Jake looked at her with awe. "You saved us just now," he said. She shook her head. "No, not yet. We're still inside the storm, and we have one engine overheating." She pointed at the right gauge. The needle was red. Jake cursed under his breath, trying to cool it. Emily's eyes narrowed, her mind racing. She whispered, "We'll need to shut it down soon and glide until we clear this front." Jake looked horrified. "Glide at this altitude, that's suicide." Emily looked straight at him. "Better a controlled glide than a free fall." Her voice carried strength, the kind that comes from facing death and returning anyway. She reached for the control switch, her hand trembling slightly, and in that moment, a memory flashed before her. Eyes, the old crash, the screaming crew, the explosion, the fire. She blinked it away, whispering, "Not this time, not again." Jake stared at her, realizing she was fighting ghosts and storms. At the same time, he whispered to himself, "Whoever she is, she's our only hope." Outside, lightning danced across the sky, turning the clouds white and silver. The storm roared louder, but inside the cockpit, there was something stronger than fear, determination and courage, glowing quietly in the eyes of a woman who was never meant to be alive but was now the only one keeping everyone from falling. The storm outside raged like a living creature, shaking the small jet with violent force as Emily Carter sat in the captain's seat, her hands steady on the controls, her eyes locked on the endless gray ahead. Lightning flashed around her, and the sound of thunder rolled through the sky like drums of warning. Jake, the co-pilot, looked at her with both fear and awe, trying to understand who this woman really was and how she could stay calm when death felt so close. Emily's voice cut through the roar of the wind, her tone firm but quiet. "Shut down the right engine now," she said. Jake hesitated, his eyes wide. "That's suicide," he shouted. "We'll lose power." She looked straight at him, her eyes sharp. "Trust me, if we don't, we'll lose both engines." Jake's hands shook as he reached for the lever. He pulled it back and the engine slowly died, its roar fading into silence. The jet trembled but did not fall. Instead, it leveled slightly, caught in the balance of her control for a moment. There was quiet, only the heavy breathing of both pilots and the hum of the single working engine. Emily looked out the window, her face lit by flashes of lightning, her voice softer now. "We'll glide until we clear the front. Once we find clean air, we'll restart it." Jake glanced at her and said, "Who are you really? You're not just some passenger." Emily's lips curved into a faint, sad smile. "I was once a captain like him," she whispered, pointing to the empty seat beside her. Sarah, the flight attendant, stood near the door of the cockpit, holding onto the wall, her eyes wide. She had been listening the whole time. She spoke softly. "A captain, but everyone said you died in a crash." Emily nodded slowly, her mind drifting back to memories she had tried to bury the crash training flight 17 years ago. She said the aircraft lost power mid-air. We tried to save it, but the storm was stronger. The explosion threw me out. I woke up in a hospital. 3 weeks later, they told me I had no pulse. When they found me, they said I was gone for 7 minutes, and yet here I am. Jake's mouth opened slightly, his voice shaking. 7 minutes. He repeated, "They thought you were dead." She nodded. "Yes, and maybe part of me was," she said quietly. "Since then my body does strange things. Sometimes it shuts down, like before my heart slows, until it almost stops. People think I am gone, but it always comes back," Sarah whispered. "Like today." Emily's eyes glimmered. "Like today." The plane shook again, pulling them out of the silence. The storm thickened outside, black clouds swirling like giant waves. The turbulence grew wilder and the lights flickered. Passengers screamed from the cabin. Sarah turned to go back, but Emily said, "Stay here, you'll be safer." Jake's hands tightened on the yoke as the jet dropped sharply. Emily shouted, "Pull up now, together." They forced the nose upward. The plane groaned like a wounded animal fighting to stay alive. Air Control's voice crackled through the radio flight. 327, "We're losing your signal. Are you still in command?" Emily answered, her voice strong and clear. "This is Emily Carter. We are holding altitude, but one engine is down. Requesting emergency runway coordinates." "Repeat emergency coordinates," the radio hissed for a few seconds before the voice came back. "Copy that, Emily. We're guiding you toward Colorado Springs. Prepare for descent once you're clear of the storm." Emily replied, "Understood," and turned to Jake. "Stay with me. We're not done yet." In the cabin, panic was spreading faster. Passengers prayed out loud. Some whispered their final words to loved ones. Others sat frozen, gripping their armrests. A young girl cried, asking her mother if they would die. The mother pulled her close, whispering, "No, sweetheart, an angel is flying this plane now." And somehow those words made the fear fade for a moment as hope flickered like a candle in the dark. Back in the cockpit, Emily's hands moved fast. She read the instruments, adjusted the pressure gauges, checked the stabilizers. Every move was careful, every motion practiced. Jake could see her eyes calculating, reading the storm like a map. He asked, "How can you stay so calm?" She replied, "I already met death once. It doesn't scare me anymore. What scares me is giving up, and I will not let that happen. Not again." Her voice carried strength like steel wrapped in kindness. She looked ahead through the rain, trying to spot a break in the clouds. Jake pointed there, a light faint and distant. Emily nodded. "Good, that's the edge of the storm. Hold steady." They pushed the controls together. The jet trembled as if refusing to move forward, but Emily whispered to it softly, "Come on, girl. Just a little more. You've got this." Like she was talking to an old friend, the plane responded, the nose rising slightly, the clouds thinning. Suddenly, the sky began to brighten, faint rays of sunlight breaking through the darkness, the storm behind them fading like a shadow. Jake laughed, half crying. "We did it," Emily smiled, but her face was pale, sweat running down her forehead. Her body trembling slightly, she felt weak. Her vision blurred for a second. She gripped the seat harder. Jake noticed and asked, "Are you okay?" She nodded. "Yes. Just tired." Sarah exhaled a shaky breath. She looked out the window and saw the calm blue above the storm. The passengers started cheering, thinking it was over. But Emily's eyes stayed fixed on the engine gauge. It flickered dangerously. She whispered, "Not yet the right engine. We need to bring it back online now." Jake moved to restart it, turning the ignition switch. Sparks flew from the panel and a small burst of smoke filled the cockpit. Emily coughed, waving it away. "Don't stop," she said. "Keep trying." The engine groaned, then sputtered and slowly came back to life. The sound was rough but steady. Emily smiled weakly. "We're back." Jake grinned. "You're unbelievable," he said. Emily looked at him, her voice soft. "Not unbelievable, just alive when I wasn't supposed to be." The radio buzzed again. Air control speaking. "Emily, we have you locked on radar. Clear skies ahead. You are en route to Colorado Springs runway 12. Emily nodded, her eyes full of quiet relief. "Tell them to have medics ready," she said softly. "And tell them Captain Mark didn't make it." Her voice cracked for the first time since she took the controls, and the silence that followed felt heavy like grief and gratitude mixed together as the plane glided through the golden light of sunrise with a woman at the helm who had already crossed the line between life and death once and come back to save them all. The sky was finally clearing, but the air inside the plane was heavy, every breath filled with fear and exhaustion. Emily Carter sat in the captain's seat, her hands still gripping the controls, her face pale, her hair damp with sweat. Jake sat beside her, his heart still racing. He had never seen anything like this before. A woman once thought dead now flying a half-damaged jet through the edge of a storm like she was born for it. The passengers behind them were silent. The cries and prayers had faded into whispers. Sarah stood near the door, her eyes red but filled with hope. She looked at Emily and whispered, "You saved us." Emily shook her head slowly. "Not yet," she said softly. "The storm isn't finished." Jake frowned. "What do you mean we're almost clear?" Emily's eyes stayed on the radar. The screen showed a cluster of red ahead, another cell of thunder waiting in their path. Jake's heart sank. "How big is it?" he asked. Emily's voice was calm, but her hands tightened on the wheel. "Big enough," she said, her tone quiet but steady. Air control's voice came through the radio. "Flight 327. You have another storm front forming ahead. Can you divert?" Emily pressed the mic. "Negative," she said. "Fuel is too low to turn around. We continue through the gap." The radio went silent for a moment before replying, "Copy that, Emily Carter. Good luck." Her name echoed in the small cockpit. Jake turned. To her, they all remember that name, right? She looked at him confused. He said, "When I was training, I heard your story. Every pilot did. They said you were the one who fought the impossible storm and still brought part of your crew back alive. Even after the crash, they called you the ghost captain." Emily's eyes glistened with sadness and memory. "I didn't save everyone," she said softly, "and I never forgave myself." She stared out the window, her voice trembling. "They were my friends. My team. I heard their voices when the fire came. They screamed my name, but I couldn't move. I was trapped. I wanted to die with them. But somehow I lived." Jake wanted to say something, but the words stuck in his throat. Outside, thunder rolled again like the sky itself was listening. Emily blinked hard. Shaking away the tears, she straightened her shoulders and said, "We have another chance now. Maybe this is why I'm still here." Sarah's voice broke from the doorway. "That's not a maybe," she said firmly. "You were meant to survive for this moment." The plane entered the new storm before anyone could brace. The sky went black again. Rain lashed the windows like bullets. The wings shuddered. Lightning flashed too close this time. The cabin lights flickered. Passengers screamed. Sarah shouted, "Stay seated, hold tight." Jake tried to keep the plane level, but the turbulence was violent. The controls fought back. Emily shouted, "Adjust flaps to 20 degrees. Now Jake followed her lead. But the storm pushed harder. The plane dropped. Suddenly alarms blared red across the dashboard. Altitude falling, altitude falling. The voice from the warning system repeated over and over. Jake cursed under his breath. Emily's voice cut through the chaos, strong and clear. "We're not falling, we're flying," she said, gripping the controls tight, her knuckles white with strain. Inside the cabin, the fear was unbearable. A woman fainted. A child cried out for his father, and Sarah moved down the aisle, holding onto seats, trying to calm them. She told them to trust Emily, to breathe, to hold each other, to wait for the light. Her voice soft but filled with belief, like a prayer in the storm. Emily's arms ached, every muscle burning, but she refused to let go. Jake shouted, "We're loosing the left stabilizer." "It's not holding," she bit her lip, sweat rolling down her face. Then she whispered, "We need to climb through it. If we stay here, we'll be torn apart." She looked at Jake and said, Together on my count, 1, 2, 3, pull. They pulled the controls with all their strength. The plane screamed metal, groaning thunder exploding around them. But slowly the nose began to rise. The storm's darkness thinned. Sunlight flickered through the clouds like golden cracks opening in the sky. The passengers gasped. As brightness filled the windows, the shaking softened, and suddenly they broke free into the calm air above the storm, where the world turned golden and endless. The silence that followed felt unreal. Jake laughed weakly, almost crying. "We made it," Emily smiled faintly, her voice soft. "We made it through," but then her expression changed. She looked at the fuel gauge and her heart sank. "We're running on fumes," she said quietly. "Less than 15 minutes of power left." Sarah's face went pale. "Can we make it to the runway?" Emily hesitated. "Maybe," she said, "if the wind helps us." The radio crackled air control again. "Flight 327. Runway 12 is clear. Do you have visual?" Emily squinted through the haze ahead. She saw the faint outline of mountains and the tiny glimmer of a runway far below. "I see it," she said, her voice filled with focus, descending now. As the plane began to lower, the passengers started clapping, crying, hugging each other, thinking it was finally over. But Emily's mind was racing. She knew landing a damaged jet with nearly no fuel was harder than flying through the storm. Jake noticed her shaking hands. "You sure you can do this?" he asked. Emily looked at him, her eyes full of quiet strength. "I've done this before in my nightmares. Now I'll do it for real." They began the descent, the engines groaning, the ground growing closer, the radio buzzing with guiding voices. Sarah strapped herself in, whispering a prayer. The passengers followed, doing the same. The sound of wind grew louder, Emily's voice calm and sure. "Prepare for landing," she said. The runway lights blinked below like stars calling them home. Jake's hands shook, Emily's voice steady again. Flaps 30 landing gear down the wheels creaked open. The plane started to tremble as it hit a downdraft. The nose dropped too fast. Jake shouted, "We're too low." Emily's jaw tightened. "Not yet," she whispered. "Not yet. Hold it." Her hands moved fast, pulling the lever, lifting the nose just in time. The ground rushed toward them. The wheels touched the runway with a violent jolt. Sparks flew across the tarmac. The plane bounced once, twice, then rolled forward. The sound deafening. Everyone screamed, then silence. The jet slid across the wet runway until it slowed to a stop. Steam rising from the wheels, rain still falling but soft now. The passengers broke into cheers, sobbing and clapping, some shouting her name. Emily sat back, breathing hard, her eyes closed. Jake whispered, "We made it." She opened her eyes, looking toward the sunrise ahead, and whispered, "Maybe now I can rest." The sound of the rain softened as the plane came to a stop. Steam rising from the tires, smoke curling near the wings. The passengers frozen in shock for a long moment. No one spoke, not a single word. Then slowly, like a wave spreading across the cabin, people began to cry and clap and shout. The cries of fear turned into cries of joy, the sound of life returning after the shadow of death. Emily Carter sat in the captain's seat, her hands still gripping the controls, her arms shaking, her breath heavy, her heart pounding like thunder inside her chest. Jake turned toward her, his eyes wide with disbelief and admiration, his voice trembling. "We're safe, Emily. You did it." She looked at him weakly, a small smile on her pale face. "We did it," she whispered. Sarah pushed through the aisle, tears running down her cheeks. She reached the cockpit door and saw Emily leaning back, eyes half closed, her voice soft. "You brought us home," she said. Emily looked up at her and said, "No, Sarah, you all helped me come home." Outside the window, emergency vehicles rushed toward the plane, flashing lights cutting through the gray morning. Paramedics, fire trucks, and airport security surrounding them. The sound of sirens mixed with the hum of rain and the faint cries of relief from the passengers. The door opened and a rush of cold air filled the cabin. Sarah shouted, "Everyone stay seated. We will help you out safely." The passengers nodded, still stunned by the miracle they had just witnessed. Jake unbuckled his seat and looked at Emily, his voice gentle. "You should be the first one out." The world needs to see the woman who saved 100 lives. Emily shook her head slowly, her gaze distant. I'm not. The hero here, she said. The real hero is the one who never left us. She pointed to the empty seat beside her, the seat where Captain Mark once sat. Her voice cracked. He stayed with us, even when he was gone. Tears filled Jake's eyes. He placed his hand on the empty seat and whispered, "Thank you, Captain." Then he looked back at Emily, who seemed to grow weaker by the second, her breathing shallow, her face losing color. "Emily," he said softly, "are you okay?" She nodded slowly. "Just tired," she whispered, "maybe too tired." 2 paramedics entered the cockpit with stretchers and oxygen masks. One reached for Emily, but she raised a trembling hand. "No, help the others first." She said. The man hesitated but saw the determination in her eyes and moved on to assist Sarah with the passengers. Emily sat quietly watching everyone being helped one by one, her lips forming a faint smile. Outside, news crews were already gathering the story of the miracle flight spreading fast across radios and screens, the world hearing the name Emily Carter. Once again, the ghost captain. Now the savior of Flight 327, reporters called it, the flight that death couldn't claim, the plane that came back from the storm, the woman who flew out of the grave as the passengers stepped down onto the wet runway. Some knelt and kissed the ground. Others hugged strangers as if they were family. Sarah guided them one by one, but she kept looking back toward the cockpit. Her heart heavy with worry, she whispered to Jake, "Is she still inside?" Jake nodded. "She's resting." She said she didn't want to leave until everyone was safe. Minutes passed. The last passenger stepped off the plane, the cabin empty now, only the hum of the cooling engines filling the silence. Sarah and Jake returned to the cockpit. Emily was sitting still, her head resting against the seat, her eyes closed, her hands folded on her lap. Sarah called her name softly. "Emily." No answer. She touched her shoulder gently. Emily opened her eyes slowly, a faint smile on her lips. "We made it, didn't we?" Sarah nodded, tears falling. "Yes, you did, Emily. You saved everyone." Emily's voice was a whisper. "I didn't save them, Sarah. They saved me." She looked out the window where sunlight finally broke through the clouds, golden light spilling across the wet tarmac. She took a deep, shaky breath. "I've spent so long running from my past, from the ghosts, from that crash. Maybe I was given one more chance to make it right. And now maybe I can rest." Jake felt a lump in his throat. He said, "You earned your peace, Captain." Emily looked at him weakly, her eyes soft. "Thank you," she whispered. Then her head tilted slightly. Her breathing slowed. Sarah cried out, "Emily, stay with us," but Emily's voice came one last time, faint like wind through the rain. "It's okay, I'm not afraid anymore." Her eyes closed and her body relaxed like she had simply fallen asleep. A calm smile still on her face. The medics rushed in, checking her pulse, but Sarah already knew. She held Emily's hand and whispered, "Thank you for coming back when we needed you most." Outside, the sun rose higher, breaking the gray sky into light. Passengers stood on the runway, watching as medics carried Captain Mark and Emily together wrapped in white covers. People bowed their heads in silence, a moment of respect for the 2 souls who had guided them home. Later that day, headlines around the world told the same story. Flight 327, the miracle in the storm, the woman thought dead who flew again. Survivors called her an angel, a legend, a light in the darkness. But Jake and Sarah knew the truth better than anyone. Emily Carter was not an angel. She was human, a woman who had fallen, faced the darkness, and found the strength to rise again. Her courage born from pain, her calm born from loss, her heart stronger than the storm itself. As the last light of day touched the runway, Jake stood beside Sarah watching the empty sky, his voice quiet. "She's gone, but I feel like she's still up there." Sarah smiled. Through tears, "Maybe she is." She said maybe she finally found her peace among the clouds. And somewhere high above the fading storm, where the sky turned gold and endless, a soft whisper seemed to echo through the wind, a voice calm and sure saying, "Once again, hold steady, we're not falling, we're flying."